All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our legislative briefing webinar. And we're at that time of year where we've gotten through crossover, which means every bill had to pass through either the House or Senate in order to kind of stay viable for the year. So it's a great time to get a quick update on what is happening on key climate issues. My name is Lauren Hurl, and I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Conservation Voters. And VCV is a statewide, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that works to advocate for strong environmental laws, hold lawmakers accountable, and help elect pro-environment candidates. And I'm really delighted to be joined today by a great panel of experts, and we have a lot of ground to cover. And really a lot of this session is framed around coming out of last summer's devastating flooding. It really has spurred a lot of kind of increased interest and momentum for addressing climate change. And that has translated into momentum for both mitigation policies, doing our part to cut climate pollution, and resilience efforts. So we're going to talk about kind of both of those sides of the coin today. And one of the projects that VCV coordinates every year is the development of the Environmental Common Agenda, where we work with a range of partner organizations to identify the key policy priorities for the legislative session. And we really came in this year with an ambitious agenda and are really excited to be able to share with you all that a lot of our biggest priorities are still moving forward, and we'll talk about them in more detail today. So these include the modernization of the Renewable Energy Standard, the Climate Superfund Bill, and the Flood Safety Act. So for today's agenda, we're going to walk through each of those bills. And after each bill overview, we're going to have time for some questions. And then we're going to transition to walking through some additional priorities, including a ban on neonicotinoid pesticides, Act 250 reform, thermal energy networks, ratepayer, and the latest on what's happening with the clean heat standard. So those will be much briefer, but then we do also have a little bit of time for questions after that quick update as well. And then we'll wrap up. We're looking to get you out of here by 1:30. Please, throughout, just stay on mute if you're not presenting, but we would love for you to put your questions and reflections into the chat, and we're going to work to get to as many of your questions as we can throughout the agenda. I did just want to note I need to peel out a few minutes early because a bill that bans toxic PFAS chemicals is on the House floor coming up sometime around 1:15, so I need to run over for that. But some of my colleagues here will help us wrap up those last few minutes. So thanks to them for covering that. And so thanks again for being here. And I'm just going to get right into it and turn it over to first Jonathan Dowd, who is the Deputy Director of Renewable Energy Vermont, to talk about the modernized renewable energy standard. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you, Lauren. A lot of familiar faces in here. I am going to be starting with the basics on this one. So some of you may have heard some of this before, but Vermont's Renewable Energy Standard is the law which mandates how much renewable power our utilities must buy. Vermont passed its res in 2015, and at this point, every other New England state has updated their renewable energy standards since that time. So ours is now the oldest in New England. It's also the least ambitious in New England. But we are seeing very good progress towards passage of H289, which is a transformative update to the renewable energy standard that brings it much more in line with what our other New England states are doing. And in fact, would make Vermont just the second state in the country to get to 100% renewable electricity. So again, this is a bill that deals with where our utilities purchase their power from, and would get us to 100% renewable energy by 2035, with a big focus on bringing new renewables online. The development and deployment of new renewable energy is really important, because it is only by bringing new renewables online that we can ramp down our use of natural gas plants and other fossil fuel generating facilities that are located throughout New England. As well as the climate justice component of this, I just want to pause for a minute and mention specifically the environmental and health justice pieces of these. There are 64 natural gas plants located throughout New England that provide close to half of our region's power. 62 of those 64 are located in communities that are disproportionately low income, people of color, or have children, young children, children under 5. So it's the climate impacts, which are global. It's also very real, very local health impacts that we're addressing by switching to renewable energies. All right. So what does H289 do? I said at the top level, it gets us to 100% renewable electricity by 2035. And it has a big focus on bringing new renewables online. In terms of its impact, by 2035, it'd be about the same climate impact as taking 240,000 cars off the road. So this has a very big and very important climate impact. You'll sometimes hear people say that Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions from electricity are not as big as from transportation and thermal, and that's true. But what this bill does is it helps clean up the entire New England grid by putting that focus on building. So as I said, the impact is quite significant. There's a great deal of sort of customization for Vermont's different utilities. So Green Mountain Power serves close to 75% of the load in Vermont, and is a very different structure than some of our smaller municipal utilities. So I'm going to be talking mostly in sort of the high level numbers here and where we're getting in broad terms, but know that there have been a lot of careful negotiation and carve out with different utilities to make sure that these are all goals that are technically achievable. The utilities are on board with these. They say we can hit these targets, and we'll have only a relatively modest impact on rates. So there are 2 new renewables buckets within that 100% renewable category. One of them is what has historically been known as Tier 2, but that's in-state distributed generation. So projects that we're building in Vermont that are smaller than 5 megawatts, rooftop solar, standard offer projects that are a few megawatts in size. These have some unique benefits in terms of grid upgrades. They can be done in conjunction with microgrids. They don't utilize the transmission infrastructure very much at current penetration levels. So there's some real benefits to distributed generation specifically, in addition to the benefits that it provides as renewable generation. And it also addresses that environmental justice component on another layer, because we want to be doing this work here in Vermont. We want to be really taking responsibility for our energy usage and doing as much of that in state as is practical and feasible. So this bill would require all Vermont utilities to get 20% of their power from this small in-state sources by 2035. And in fact, Green Mountain Power and Vermont Electric Co-op would hit that 20% threshold by 2032. This is a really big deal. There's also a new bucket in there, which we're calling new regional renewable power. This is Tier 4 in the wonky bill lingo, but this is just new renewable power from anywhere in New England. So that might include things like offshore wind, which are very complementary to solar, produce at different times, and also have these same climate benefits as far as displacing natural gas. And for that, Green Mountain Power would get to 20% by 2035, and our other utilities would hit at least 10% of that. So overall, this would quadruple the amount of new renewable energy that we're getting relative to the status quo. As I said, it would eliminate as much pollution as taking 240,000 cars off the road, would increase the amount of generation that Vermont does in state, so that we're bearing more of that energy burden rather than exporting it to what are often low-income and marginalized communities around New England, and put Vermont on track to hit 100% renewable electricity faster than any state except for Rhode Island. And all this would have, a small impact on electrical rates, maybe 3% of our total spending by 2035. A few dollars a month on the electric bill in most cases. As far as process, this passed out of the House just before crossover. There is a veto-proof majority that supports the bill. We had a 99 to 39 vote, but have strong yeses from 4 of the folks who are absent there. So we could get over 100 votes in the House, which is terrific. The Scott administration has been a bit hostile to this bill, as they are to many climate initiatives. And next week, we expect it to be taken up by the Senate Natural Resources Committee. We are hoping for a vote by the full Senate by the end of the month. This would force the governor to either sign the bill or veto it while the legislature is still in session, and then give us the clearest path to a veto override if that is needed, and it will be needed. So that's kind of where the bill stands now and some of the highlights in it. I'd be happy to take questions about either policy or process components.
Yeah, so again, please feel free to put questions in the chat. You also, if you're processing all that great info Jonathan just laid out, we can move into the next update and we can still get to renewable energy questions in a few minutes if people are still thinking about what they want to ask Jonathan. All right, well, again, feel free to put res questions in any time, but let's just transition over to Ben Edgerly-Walsh, who is the Climate and Clean Energy Program Director at the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, and he's going to be talking with us about the Climate Superfund bill. So take it away, Ben.
Thanks so much, Lauren. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen here. Been doing Zoom long enough, I think I can pull it off. Oh, come on. Sorry, I'm trying to move it into slideshow mode. And here we go. All right, folks, see that?
Yeah,
great. So I'll be talking about S259, the Climate Superfund Act. You may have heard about a sort of different version of this bill that was introduced in the House. The way the Vermont legislature works, a bill moves from one body into the other. So H809 had nearly 100 co-sponsors in the House. It won't be taken up, but essentially the same bill was passed by the Senate with some improvements the Senate made, and by a very wide margin with tripartisan support, progressives, Democrats, and independents all voting for it on the floor of the Senate. So I think that bodes well for our chances on this. So I'm going to get into a little bit of the why, the how for this bill, and then, as Jonathan did with the res, a little bit of just where it's at, what to expect over the next month or so between now and the end of the legislative session. So first of all, starting with why, the organizations on this webinar work on a whole lot of different initiatives that are about cutting carbon pollution. That is not what this bill is about. This bill is about climate resilience, adaptation, and response. Certainly, there are some things that you will do in that space, like weatherizing homes to better protect the residents of those homes from heat waves. That will also cut carbon pollution. But the goals and really the point of this bill is about resilience, adaptation, and response in the face of the climate crisis. And this is, we often talk about climate change in terms of our children and grandchildren, and certainly they will be facing enormous costs. The costs that we're facing right now, today, in this budget cycle and in people's home and business budgets are already staggering. So this is not something that is in the future, as everyone very viscerally knows. So why make big oil pay? Why this bill? It really boils down to these costs are staggering, and they are more significant than we will be able to deal with by ourselves here in Vermont. And when we look at the climate crisis, ultimately the overwhelming cause of it is fossil fuels. And when you look at the fossil fuel industry, that is a truly unimaginably profitable industry in 2022. And again, in 2023, just the top 6 or 7 fossil fuel companies in the world made $200+ billion in profits, just in those years alone, to say nothing of all the profits they've made over the decades. They very clearly knew about the climate crisis decades ago. That's very well documented. And they should be required to pay their fair share to address the cost of this crisis to Vermont. Not every dime. Vermonters, even if this bill passes and is implemented, will still have, very real costs associated with the climate crisis, just like everyone everywhere else. But this bill would require these major fossil fuel companies to pay their fair share for the cost of the climate crisis. And this is really based on this polluters pay principle. It's well established in state and federal law. The best known example of it is the Superfund Act that is intended to clean up toxic waste sites at the federal level, using the funds from the polluting industries and the polluting companies that cause those toxic waste sites. So really, the question that this bill is seeking to answer is, who do we think should pay for the costs caused by the climate crisis? And from our perspective, the answer is clear. Vermonters should not have to shoulder these costs on their own. And the largest fossil fuel companies in the world that have any sort of legal or physical footprint in Vermont should have to pay their fair share. So we're going to get into a little bit on exactly how this bill works, what would happen if the bill actually was enacted. I will note, of course, we expect a legal challenge to this. The Senate has gotten testimony that this is on very solid legal grounding. As I mentioned, this polluters pay principle is very common across the country and has been upheld in courts. This would be the first time that it was applied to the climate crisis, but the legal basis for that is very sound. So setting that aside, what are the actual steps laid out in the bill? Number one, the Agency of Natural Resources, along with the Treasurer's Office, would adopt something called a resilience implementation strategy. That's essentially a prioritized plan for resilience and adaptation investments we need to make as a state. That would happen over about a year after the bill passes. Then the state treasurer would be tasked with estimating the costs of the climate crisis to Vermont, and particularly the climate crisis from the fossil fuel-based emissions from the last 30 years or so. Next, the Agency of Natural Resources would have to do rulemaking, essentially figuring out exactly who are the responsible parties that have a legal connection to Vermont, the share each of those companies have of global greenhouse gas emissions from the fossil fuel industry over that period, and then actually delivering the cost recovery demands, essentially saying ExxonMobil, Chevron, Shell, whichever company we're talking about, you need to cough up X number of dollars based on this law and your portion of the estimated damage to Vermont. They would be issuing those probably in 2027. Their first payments would be required to come in about 6 months after that. They'd be deposited in a fund created by this bill, and then ultimately would be used for climate change adaptation projects. So to put it in one slide, this is the sort of flow of events that follows this. But really, let's talk about for a second, what exactly this would enable. So we don't know exactly how much money would be coming in. Certainly, I think a reasonable expectation would be that it would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, but because the bill, puts this task of making the cost estimate on the Treasurer's Office, that's something that would only be known down the road. But whatever amount of money comes in, ultimately it would be spent on what the bill titles climate change adaptation projects and some associated expenses, and this is really very broadly adaptation, resilience, and response to the climate crisis. You can see the definition there. You can find the bill on the website if you want to read the whole definition along with a whole lot of examples of these kinds of investments. You were talking about roads and bridges and wetlands and riparian zones, along with home buyouts and other efforts to lessen or respond to the damage the climate crisis is causing here in Vermont. I'll just briefly note, because I know I'm running up on time, the Treasurer's assessment would be based on both the direct costs, the damage essentially to the state in financial terms of the climate crisis from this period, and the costs that the state reasonably would be incurring on resilience and adaptation investments. So it's sort of both of those, looking back the last few decades and looking forward. Lastly, each company that we can reach from a legal standpoint would be responsible for essentially their percentage of total global emissions. We're talking very, very, very large companies that emitted more than 1 billion metric tons of carbon pollution during this 30-year period. So, if you had, to use the example on the slide here, a company that emitted roughly 1% of the emissions over this period from the fossil fuel industry, they would have to pay 1% of whatever that cost estimate the treasurer came up with. So just to wrap, before I very briefly say where this is, again, the cost of the climate crisis is staggering. It's already here. Vermonters are shouldering that burden largely on their own, and that is not right. The companies that actually are responsible for this crisis should have to pay their fair share, and that's what this bill is all about. In terms of where it is in the process, the Senate passed it, as I mentioned earlier, overwhelming support, tripartisan support. It is actually going to be up in the House committees on Judiciary and Environment and Energy in a joint hearing this Thursday morning, and again this Thursday afternoon in Judiciary, and we expect the Environment and Energy Committee to take further testimony on it next week. We are very optimistic about this bill's chances getting the rest of the way through the process because of the strong support we've seen. It's not clear whether the governor will ultimately support it, though the Agency of Natural Resources has had a lot of say over changes made to the bill. But I would just say, if you have a moment or interested in supporting this bill, reach out to your legislators, ask them to support it. If they co-sponsored or voted for it in the Senate, thank them for their support. We need to keep on building on the momentum that we have.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben. The one question I see so far was, could you speak to the projected litigation costs, knowing that we do anticipate a legal challenge to the bill? I don't know what we've heard, and whatever you can say about that.
I'm not going to speculate on exactly what those costs are. I will say there is no world in which they don't pale in comparison to the potential benefits of the funds coming into the state. It would be orders of magnitude more potential funding for climate resilience in Vermont than any potential legal defense funding. And frankly, this is a fight worth having. The Attorney General is on the record saying if we are challenged, she would happily defend the law, be proud to defend the law, and has not asked for additional resources. So I think that should give you a sense of the sort of confidence that legislators and the Attorney General's office has in defending this bill.
Thank you. Are there any other questions people have on this that you can put in the chat? Otherwise, we can transition to the next one. But again, feel free to ask questions about any of the topics we're covering, and at the end, we can try to get to any of them. All right. Well, everyone, your presentations must be very clear, Jonathan and Ben, so far. So next, we're going to have Karina Daly, who is the restoration ecologist at the Vermont Natural Resources Council, speak to us about the Flood Safety Act. Take it away, Karina.
Hi, I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone hear me okay? Cool. Okay. Okay, well, good to be here, and sorry I was testifying earlier, so I just came over from the State House, so I'm a pro at this right now. S213, the Flood Safety Act. So right now, House Environment and Energy is taking testimony on wetlands and dams and rivers related to this, and it passed the Senate a couple of weeks ago with a very strong vote of 24 to I think 24-4. Yeah, and it was a bipartisan vote, so that was very exciting as well. But basically this Act addresses our nature-based solutions to climate change. Our natural infrastructure is our best line of defense with these floods. And we're really trying, the beauty of this bill is that it really encompasses a watershed scale approach to flood protection. Both it has a wetlands component, a dam removal and dam safety component, and a river corridor and flood inundation component. So those are the three big components of the bill. And it's really in response to climate change and response to the flooding that happened in 2023. And this graphic is sort of my educational graphic about how freshwater systems work and how they move in 4 dimensions, and we need all of those 4 dimensions to be connected to fully have a functioning freshwater system. So rivers move up and down longitudinally, and when you block that system with a dam, you change the function of that river system. So sediment builds up behind the dam, and the river can no longer transport water, can no longer transport sediment or nutrients downstream, and wildlife cannot move up and down that system. Similarly, when you build along your rivers or your wetlands, you block that lateral connection to the system. So when there are flood events, the water cannot go out onto that floodplain or wetland to attenuate and slow down and filter and provide clean, cold water. There's also a vertical connection, so that's groundwater connecting to surface water. Our groundwater, our spring seeps provide the clean, cold, clear water that we need to feed our rivers and our streams. And so often a wetland seep high up in the watershed, someone doesn't like it in their backyard, so they dig into it or fill over it, and that blocks the connection to that system, to that headwater system, and ultimately the river itself. And then lastly, the temporal connection and the recognition that rivers and wetlands change over time. They're dynamic and they evolve. And I think the river corridor section of the bill really speaks to that because it's giving the river space to move over time and form new channels. And that's part of this process, is giving it that space to move. So that's just a little primer. But the Flood Safety Act works at the watershed scale, addressing those 3 components. It addresses public safety, first and foremost. It reduces the economic burden and the municipal burden of having to recover and fix these problems after they've occurred. So it's really preventative measures of investing in our natural infrastructure as our first line of defense. And it provides communities with resilience ultimately by improving water quality, habitat diversity as well. The river corridors and floodplains section, the important piece to understand there are 2 components to that. So river corridors, I spoke to that, giving the river room to move and understanding that rivers change over time, and you can have a channel in one place, and then 5 years later a storm event comes through and that channel jumps its bank and you have a new channel forming. So that's the river corridor, and recognizing that space, whether it's floodplain or bedrock on one side, and giving it the river the room to move. And that's where a lot of our damage in Vermont is during flood events. So that's the erosion damage. Fluvial erosion is what it's called. And then there's also the inundation damage. So that's when we have, our FEMA mapped floodplain, our flood inundation maps. The damage from that is actually 20% of our damage in Vermont versus the erosion. Fluvial erosion damage is 80%. So currently we aren't protecting our river corridors unless, the municipality has a river corridor rule, or under Act 250 or Act 248. So it's a very piecemeal approach currently, and this legislation will provide river corridor protection and a permitting program for work in river corridors, so that we are not building homes in these areas and identifying those areas in downtown development areas where we can build because we're already protecting the infrastructure in those areas anyway. So a part of this includes mapping to identify where we can infill, because we already have to protect the river corridor in those places, and then where we can pull out and fully protect the river corridor. Currently, many of our vulnerable populations are along river corridors. It's cheap, affordable land, quote unquote, affordable, because no one wants to live there because it's high hazard area and it floods a lot. So we need to change that and provide housing in other places that are safe. In addition to, well, I'll change to this slide just shows how river corridors move over time. And so the river corridor would be the identified belt width between these different channels. So it's sort of the greatest space that the river could have and move into. And often, you know, you can have a very wide river corridor when you have a floodplain on one side. But if you have bedrock on the other side, that river corridor is never going to move on that side because that bedrock is a natural barrier. So this slide, I think I spoke to this, but that's that river corridor 80% flood-related damage versus the floodplains is the 20% flood-related damage. And the floodplain piece of this program in the bill creates a more climate appropriate standard for development within the NFIP towns. And it creates a study committee to assess how to most effectively and efficiently administer that program. Currently, it's very piecemeal across the state. Some municipalities opt in and some don't. So then the wetlands piece of this bill, going back to that first diagram I showed you, wetlands basically reduce peak stormwater flows by providing a sponge to filter and slow down, attenuate floodwaters. And we need to protect that function and enhance it for the future. So there's a net gain component of this bill that requires us to transition from a no net loss policy that's currently the state wetlands policy to a net gain. So we are making up for our history of wetland loss in the state to restore those services to the wetland that we can moving into the future. And it's really just recognizing that the Clean Water Act was established to protect and preserve those functions that wetlands provide to society at large, and we're working to enhance that. So the policy includes a 2-to-1 mitigation ratio for wetlands that are impacted from development. And it's those wetlands that can't be avoided, minimized, or mitigated. And if none of those things can happen and an impact has to occur, this 2-to-1 ratio comes in when the impact is greater than 5,000 square feet and is undue and adverse. So it's an adverse impact to the wetland itself. This does not apply to agricultural practices and silvicultural practices that are currently exempt from wetlands regulation. Additionally, the bill recognizes the need for understanding wetlands, the extent of wetlands we have on the state. There's been a lot of problems in the past with people building houses in mapped wetlands, or building their septic system in a wetland and their septic system fails, having flooding in their basement. So we're trying to prevent that frustration and really get a sense of how many wetlands we do have on the landscape, the extent, size, and character of them. So this bill actually continues some of the great work the state is already doing related to wetlands mapping and ensures that mapping covers the entire state to be updated. So this is sort of an aerial imagery analysis of wetlands using infrared photography and then a ground truthing component. And then every 5 years annually, those wetlands would be revisited and updated as needed. Additionally, The Vermont Significant Wetlands Inventory Map is a map that the state uses, and it's not a jurisdictional map, it's sort of a planning map of where wetlands are in the state, what we know. When wetlands are delineated, they're added to the map, and we're asking for that to happen annually on a planned basis, where currently it's sporadic. Additionally, we're asking for reporting on wetland gain and loss on an annual basis to both the state House and Senate. And then a more detailed 5-year report that includes sort of a deeper dive into the trends of wetlands in the state, the results of this mapping updates, and permitting requirements. And then lastly, the dams, there's a dam safety piece to this. And this builds on the first slide that I showed you with the 4 dimensions of a river and wetland system, freshwater system. And this slide just shows, it's called the river continuum concept, but what happens when you put a dam in a river and how you block that function. So we were looking at that in plan view in the first slide, and now we're looking at in profile view. And when you put a barrier in that system, you block the longitudinal connectivity of the river to move up and down. You also block the river's ability to access its floodplain, because the dam, putting the dam up, inundates the land behind the dam, so that then when we have a flood event, the river can't go out onto its floodplain that historically it would have utilized in that area. So, and when we put a dam up, we also change the temperature behind the river. We block the movement of sediment, nutrients, and change the system to a much more of a lake-like system. You get sunfish and bass versus Vermont is known for their cold water brook trout. So we are addressing this in this bill by providing funds through a dam safety revolving loan fund to remove those derelict dams in Vermont that no longer serve a useful purpose, and repair those dams that need to be repaired post flooding and make sense to leave because they are serving a benefit. Additionally, the policy provides an unsafe dam petition, which works so that the Department of Dam Safety post flood event and post damage to a dam can react fast with a dam order to require maintenance or removal or partial breach of repair to stabilize that dam for the public safety. It also includes a transfer of jurisdiction of dams. There's 21 dams in the state that are producing power, but they were created before FERC, the Federal Environmental Regulatory Commission. So they are under the jurisdiction of the PUC. And that is an inefficient process to have dams under the jurisdiction of PUC and have dams under dam safety. And the power producing component of these dams will remain obviously under the jurisdiction of PUC, but their safety and inspection and maintenance requirements will be transferred to dam safety. And that's critical because dam safety has the engineers on staff to do this work. They're trained to do it. This is what they do. Currently that split jurisdiction requires PUC to hire consultants to do the work, and it's not done at the same level. And when dam safety updates their rules related to reporting and inspection, then the PUC has to. So it's just an inefficient process at this point with lack of folks that are trained to do the good, important work. And then lastly, there is a study committee on dam emergency operations that is included in part of this bill. And with that, I think I will close and just say that, stop sharing my screen. This bill is a nice opportunity to invest in natural infrastructure and prevent the economic and public safety hazards that come post flooding, and really respond proactively in this process. So happy to take questions.
Great, thank you, Karina. All right, so the first question we've got, would the dam components of this bill impact the situation with a dam owned by Morrisville Water and Light that they want to transfer to ANR?
No, to my knowledge, there's nothing in this bill that impacts Morrisville Water and Light.
Simple answer. All right, are there other questions people have right now? And again, our Make Big Oil Pay, Flood Safety Act. Feel free to add any thoughts or questions into the chat anytime. How would wetland restoration be funded?
It would be funded through the permit fees of impact, so as it's currently funded. And I didn't mention this, but the state is already doing a net gain, even though the state policy is no net loss. Their goal every year is to have a net gain from regulatory impact when impact is approved and permitted, which is less than 10% of projects that move forward. I heard testimony today. Of 10 projects, only one project is actually impacted. So 10% out of 100. And of those, those funds for the restoration would come through. And it's restoration on site first. So ideally we want to restore the function to the wetland that was impacted or to the adjacent connected system. If we can't do that, then we would look either to an in lieu fee program administered by Ducks Unlimited, who currently manages the in lieu fee program in the state, or the state could come up with their own mitigation bank.
Thanks, Karina. Okay, we got another question. For the 2-to-1 ratio for wetlands, do the wetland acquisitions have to be contiguous to the affected wetland, or can it be somewhere else in the county or in the state?
Yeah, so ideally they would be contiguous, but they don't have to be, so there's flexibility there. In the bill, there's language saying ideally when possible they should be in the Huck 8 watershed. So that's like if the impact happened in the Winooski watershed, we would want the restoration to happen in the Winooski watershed, which is a big watershed. So these are the major tributaries, the Lamoille, the Missisquoi, those are the Huck 8s. Currently, when restoration happens with the Ducks Unlimited in lieu fee program, it's not at the watershed level. So for example, like 90% of the wetlands restoration that's happening in the state from impact related permitting is in the Lake Champlain Basin. So it's really not covering when there's impact in the Connecticut River, it's not being restored in that side of the state. So this would hopefully improve that process.
Thank you, Karina. Any other questions on this before moving on to our lightning round? All right, great. Well, again, feel free to keep popping questions in there and we can do another round of Q&A at the end. But now our plan is to give you all some quick snapshots of a number of other policies that are also at play and also our big environmental community priorities, and appreciate the folks in this little section who are keeping very short what in many cases can be complicated and interesting policies. So thank you for giving us the quick overview. So we're going to start just for the rundown for everyone. We'll hear first about neonicotinoid ban legislation. We'll get an update on the Act 250 modernization, and then we'll get an update on a PUC, Public Utility Commission, kind of miscellaneous bill that's become a vehicle for a suite of policies that have been priorities like thermal energy networks and ratepayer assistance, and we'll get a quick update on the clean heat standard. So I'm going to pass it off first to Justin Marsh from the VCV team.
Good afternoon. Yes, Justin Marsh. I'm political director at Vermont Conservation Voters, and today I'm going to provide a brief overview on H706, which is legislation that is designed to protect bees and other pollinators from toxic neonicotinoid pesticides, which are more commonly known and referred to as neonics. The bill has four main components. One, it prohibits the use of field crop seeds, corn, soy, and wheat that have been treated with neonics. Two, it restricts the outdoor use of neonics that are harmful to pollinators. Three, it provides the best management practices for when neonicotinoid use is allowed. And then four, it incorporates the neonicotinoid treated seeds into the regulatory framework that already applies to other neonics. So it also provides farmers and service providers and seed dealers and seed companies with time to prepare by delaying the prohibition start date to January 1st, 2029, which lines up to match the date for a similar prohibition that begins in New York State. The bill also includes an emergency exemption that allows a lift on the prohibition if seed companies are unable to provide farmers with sufficient supply of the neonic-free seeds, and also if, for whatever reason, farmers who are purchasing the neonic-free seeds are coming up against a financial hardship. It was passed out of the House last month on a vote of 112 to 29 and is currently in the Senate Committee on Agriculture, where testimony has occurred this week and will continue throughout the week. Could see a vote out of committee as soon as the end of this week or early next week. And as I mentioned, New York State passed a similar bill, which ours is modeled after. That was signed into law last December by Governor Hochul, and Quebec passed similar legislation in 2019, and hopefully Vermont is next. So now I'm going to pass it on to Katie Gallagher from VNRC to somehow speak on Act 250 in only 2 minutes. Go.
Thank you, Justin. Yes, it will be a challenge. And I'm going to share my screen to give you some slides to help visualize this. But so there was actually several Act 250 related bills that were introduced this year. I'm just going to focus on one of those, which is H687, recently passed out of the House and is now being considered in the Senate Natural Resources Committee. Just to take a very quick step back, what is Act 250? It is Vermont's land use and development law. It was a really historic piece of environmental legislation when it was passed in 1970, but it's due for an update. So that's what we are doing. So H687 builds on the work primarily of these 3 study groups that were pulled together over the past year, and they looked at different key pieces of land use policy. So it's bringing together all of these different components beyond just Act 250, but I think it's important to kind of touch on what those other pieces are. And of course, as many folks probably know, Act 250 has been discussed inside and outside of the State House for many, many years. So this is building on many years of work. So H687 does several really important things, really quick highlights. The first is that it proposes to reinstate a professional environmental review board, or ERB, and they would handle appeals and administer the law. So this is different than the current court approach. And this environmental review board is intended to help to reduce costs and provide clear guidance to the regional district commissions and applicants to ensure that there's greater consistency and predictability across regions and districts. The second is that it would change the way that Act 250 jurisdiction works. So it changed it into a location-based jurisdiction approach based on tiers, and they would help to streamline review while promoting housing, which we know is a really critical need in our smart growth locations, like our downtowns and village centers, while also helping to protect our critical natural resource areas and working lands like farms and forests. The third piece that I want to touch on, so separate than Act 250 but related, is that it would help to strengthen regional and municipal planning goals, add consistency to land use mapping, and improve alignment between our local and regional plans and our state regulatory and incentive programs, including Act 250. And then lastly, H687 would update the state designation programs to improve municipal access to these benefits, including technical assistance, and increase smart growth investments. So again, kind of based on those regionally developed areas in consultation with the towns, we're bringing together all of these different ways in which we're trying to promote smart growth, which is really critical for many different reasons, and that can be a whole other conversation. So I will leave it there.
That was very impressive, Katie. And again, people are welcome to put questions and we will have time for Q&A. So the last lightning round we're going to start with Ben again from VPIRG to give us a snapshot of a Public Utility Commission kind of omnibus bill at this point, and then hear from Jim Dumont on a little more details on some of those priorities.
Thanks, Lauren. So I'm going to speak briefly on a couple pieces of S305, which is titled the Miscellaneous PUC Bill. And there's certainly some pieces of it I'm not going to get into that are really just, random, truly miscellaneous changes to law related to the PUC that don't have a real substantive effect. The two things I did want to flag, one, there are a couple of changes to dates related to the Clean Heat Standard. None of them will, delay implementation of the Clean Heat Standard. They're really within sort of the calendar between now and the end of next year of implementing that law. And so not anything that we are concerned about. In particular, there's a concept in that law of a default delivery agent. Think about it as sort of like an Efficiency Vermont-like entity that would, in particular, help with delivery of services to low and moderate income Vermonters. And the Public Utilities Commission essentially said they needed more time than current law allowed to appoint that entity, and so the legislature is going to give them that extra time, but it would still be, all set well before 2026 when this program should go into effect. The second thing I wanted to note is the related to the efficiency modernization pilot. We may have remembered, or some of our organizations talking about this last year. Essentially, it's a modest program, about 5% of Efficiency Vermont's budget annually, and something equivalent for Burlington Electric Department, to allow them to do more work to help with the transition to thermal and efficiency electrification. This was a 3-year pilot that was started in 2020. Last year, the legislature extended it for another 3 years, and also allowed Burlington Electric to pilot some new incentives for gasoline super users, quote unquote, or people who really have to drive quite a lot to get them into EVs. And long story short, the PUC and the Department of Public Service have really slowed the implementation of that down and put it in jeopardy. And so this would make sure that that pilot program does actually continue for this year and the next 2 years as intended last year. The last two things I'll turn it over to Jim to talk about are study on ratepayer assistance and reducing Vermonters' energy burdens, and enabling thermal energy networks to happen at a greater pace here in Vermont. Jim, take it away.
Sure, thanks, Ben. The ratepayer, I'll start with the ratepayer. The ratepayer protection language that's being proposed to be added to S305 comes from what had been H668. H668. And the basis for this language is that as of 2018, about 74,000 Vermont families at or below 200% of the federal poverty level were paying from 11% to 51% of their income on home energy. And national studies showed that no family should be paying more than 6% of their income on home energy. So particularly for poor Vermont families, it's just a tremendous burden. Other states do a much better job than Vermont does right now of protecting low-income families from unaffordable electricity. So the bill tells the PUC, we want a study from you how we can do this better, not just for electricity, but for all of the household's energy needs, and to report back to the legislature with some solutions. That's one part of S305. The other part is thermal energy networks. Thermal energy networks were part of S252 and H669. A thermal energy network, as most of you probably know, takes waste heat from industry and commercial sources and takes geothermal heat, and using horizontal and vertical piping, distributes it to houses and businesses. It's far more efficient than air source heat pumps. It's resilient. It's very low emissions. And this part of the bill is modeled on the New York statute that passed the New York Senate unanimously about a year and a half ago. It's now being implemented by the New York PSC. And the language as written in the draft would authorize utilities in Vermont to get into this business subject to PUC control, and would authorize municipalities to do it the same way they do sewer and water, which is it's entirely local control, no PUC role. We had hearings that discussed this yesterday in front of the House committee, and there was general support for both sets of changes. On the thermal energy network bill, the consensus seems to be that the municipal language should go forward as is, and the investor-owned utility language should be subject to report by the PUC, and they'll report back to the legislature within the next year to 18 months. That's it in a nutshell.
Great. Thank you for that update. Beth Sachs, any chance you would be able to give us a quick update on what's happening with divestment? Let's see if she can get off mute, or we can give her a minute to do that.
Okay, I'm off
There we
mute.
go. Great.
Hi. Hi. I can give you a really quick update on the divestment bill, which is S42. It passed the Senate gloriously with a veto-proof majority. It is in the House Government Ops, and it's just been stuck there forever. They took testimony on it last week from VPIC, the Vermont Pension Investment Commission, which is unbelievably stubborn and narrow-minded. And we have made a tremendous number of concessions to make that. They have put out a zillion reasons why they don't want this bill to pass. We've met with them and negotiated a settlement that, a position that works for them on protecting them from personal, whatever you call it, that any harm could come to them, that we lowered the standards, and they still just hate the bill and they don't want to use the word divestment. So they're pretending it's a decarbonization bill. And we've said, great, decarbonize. We should be doing both. So the VPIC last week testified, and it was very compelling and unpleasant, all the things that they were saying. They hinted, I think, at having Beth Pierce testify this week, which would be even worse, probably, because people have a lot of respect for her. And she's never supported divestment, although I think the fact that the data everywhere, all of the data says that funds that have divested, that do not have fossil fuels in them, are doing better in the marketplace. It's just, it's known. And so I would think that because she is smart, maybe she'd figure this out, but I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if anybody is close to Beth Pierce and wants to try to reach out to her, or if you want to talk to me about whether we could whether that's a good idea, please get in touch with me. Otherwise, we're Third Act and some pensioners, teachers who are pensioners from the state pension fund, are testifying on Thursday. And I'm not sure who else, someone from Third Act. Oh, and probably Mike Pichek, because he is still very supportive of the bill, the treasurer. So that's where we are. If it does get out of government ops, we'll be looking for, to help support getting a vote in the full House. So
Great.
Thanks for the time.
Appreciate the update and keep us posted on how we can help.
Thank you.
And the last update, we were going to just get a quick update from Ben, once again, back in the hot seat, to speak just a quick update on what's been happening outside of the legislative arena, but with the clean heat standard that's been over at the PUC.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm also, maybe not, I can follow up. I was going to drop in the chat a link. Yeah, it's kind of enormous. I think I might have autofilled my information, but this is on Climate Superfund Act. If you want to send a note to your representatives on it, go ahead and click that link, and please delete my information because, again, I think I might have sent the autofill link for me. On the Clean Heat Standard, well, actually, one other thing I just wanted to clear up in case there was any confusion. S305, the two things that Jim spoke about have actually not been added to the bill yet. We are pushing for Environment and Energy in the House to add them. But that is still an open question. The committee definitely seems supportive, but if any of your representatives are on there, certainly putting in a good word for those two pieces with them could be helpful. On the Clean Heat Standard, I'm going to say very high level. This is primarily intended to be, a webinar on legislative update, and other than the very small changes I mentioned in 305, the Clean Heat Standard is really not a legislative activity this year. It will be in the legislature again next year, but right now it's in front of the PUC. The quick update, though, is the Technical Advisory Group and the Equity Advisory Group, rather, are stood up. Their work is underway. The relevant consultants in both of those arenas have been hired, which may seem like a sort of small thing to update you on, but that is actually very important on such a technical bill and one where public input is so important. And then the other piece that I wanted to mention is there will be some public meetings coming up and other opportunities for public input now that the Equity Advisory Group is, their work is underway, and they have a consultant that they've brought on board to facilitate that public input process. So expect more information from organizations on that in the not too distant future. And post legislative sessions, certainly there will be opportunities for other webinars like this one where we can really get into it, give a more thorough update as that process has started to play out in more detail, and answer any questions you might have on that.
Thank you for that. All right, so at this point, that was all of the information that we were hoping to share with you all. If you have any additional questions, please put them in the chat now. And, on any of the topics that we covered, happy to talk through. We also can let everybody go a little earlier than we had scheduled. And yeah, definitely just reiterate. I know that in the chat, people have put links to finding your legislators, information for registering for the VECAN Spring Summit on June 1st, and some other good info. Any last questions? Great. Well, those were excellent summaries. Thank you so much to the wonderful panel for that great information. Thank you all for joining us today. It was great to be with you all, and thanks for keeping in touch with your legislators as these move through the process so we can get some hopefully great wins for climate action this year. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thanks all.